What's up, peeps? Archie here, and as you can see by the glasses that are on my face, you know what time it is. It's learning time. Doo-doo. We're going to be talking about lore today. Lore is a very broad concept, so we're only going to be doing like a basic rundown of it, I guess, but at the same time, it's very important. It has a lot of applications, not only to just writing, but to other things as well. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So strap in, buckle your duckles, and we'll dive right in, I guess. Like I said before, today we are going over lore. It's a very nebulous term. What is lore? Well, you're about to find out. And you'll find out how to apply it to a bunch of different things. So not only writing, but maybe you like video games and you want to know more about like video game lore. That's going to be covered too. Maybe you're an up and coming VTuber, but you don't really know what to do with your backstory. Well, that's got you covered as well. So yes, what is lore? Baby, don't hurt me. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, lore is the knowledge and information related to a particular subject, especially when this is not written down. Think of like spoken word and how that gets transferred over from person to person. It's a lot of storytelling, basically, which is very fitting because a lot of our history, or like early history as a species, is through the passing down of information by spoken word. Spoken word is a very powerful tool for just, I don't know, humanity in general. Typically, it is passed down through word of mouth, and in other applications, lore, the word lore, is used as shorthand for background history or world building in different artistic settings. So, why is lore so important in art? Well, as you can see by this nifty little diagram above my head, there's a lot more to a book than just, what the readers see. There's a lot of editing, writing, brainstorming, all of that good stuff. And lore is a very essential part of that. It goes into the research, it goes into the brainstorming ideas. Basically, lore gives depth to a narrative. Kind of like how deep the ocean is, haha, hashtag deep. But no, it just gives depth to a narrative. It makes it more interesting to the reader. And when you have a lot of depth, it keeps people engaged. But also, like an ocean, you don't want to just like leave them too far out into the abyss, because then it just gets confusing and they get lost. So it is kind of a balancing act there. Lore also helps the setting feel more realistic and cohesive. You gotta get that suspension of disbelief, baby. You gotta make sure that readers actually get engaged with whatever setting you're providing, and they feel like they want to learn more about it. That's what lore does. Lore helps them learn about your setting, learns about the rules and sort of all the mechanics that go into it. Developing lore can also flesh out other ideas in your creation and give new inspiration to other parts of the story. As an example, there is a book that I'm writing. It's a sci-fi novel. It's in a setting in the distant future, and everyone's in a giant dome. And this giant dome is made out of a particular alloy. And they've been mining this for a bunch of years to like keep up with repairs and things like that. And the place that I set it in like a real world location as sort of an inspiration for it. But weird thing about that real life location, it actually has deposits of a certain mineral that is actually used in the alloy in my story. And I didn't even plan for that. That just happened. I was like, oh, I'll just put it on top of this mountain. And then it turns out that mountain actually has resources in it that haven't been mined yet. And I'm like, that's actually pretty cool. Like, a lot of my lore has been very accidental, but it adds so much to the story. And it also makes you think, like, if you're talking about, like, yeah, there's this town that really relies on mining, you don't want to stick it in a place that is completely devoid of the materials that they're looking for. Or maybe you do. If you stick it in a place where they don't have a lot of those materials, then it can add tension to the story. It could be like, oh, they've completely like sucked this place dry. Don't take that out. No, never mind. Don't phrase it like that. Maybe they've gotten out all of the materials they can excavate from this area, and they need to find a new resource or something like that. And it adds tension to the story. That's the point of the backstory that you can add, is like, oh, they got rid of all the resources that they had here, and now they have to find new ones. There you go. Once you bring that up, it also kind of like sparks the imagination in other ways. It makes you think, oh, how exactly does this metal form down there? And you can like make up the rules there and try to find a way to plug it and apply it into your story. All right, what should lore do? First off, it should answer questions like, how did this world come to be? What's life like there? If it's applicable, where did the magic or tech come from? This is specifically if you're talking like fantasy or sci-fi or things like that. And are there any major events or people from the past? Next, you want to establish a basis for people to understand the rules of your story. Again, kind of like going off of answering these questions, just an overall concept of where your setting is and what that does for the characters and things like that. It's like a stage, essentially. You know, you don't want to just have it be completely bare bones. You gotta have the props, the design, the lighting, all of that good stuff. And also, lore makes your setting interesting. It compels the audience to learn more about it, and it immerses them. Or at least it should. It should definitely immerse your audience. But alrighty, moving on. We got types of lore building. These are the different things that we're gonna go over as far as, you know, how to implement lore into your own stories. So we've got your basic narrative exposition, we've got rumor mills, we have environmental storytelling, origin stories, and actionable lore. First off, narrative exposition. As you can see by this example, narrative exposition is a very common and very popular form of handing out your lore, because it's just information given directly to the audience. It's simple, it's direct, it's accessible. We all know the Star Wars reels, just flying off into space, giant words that somehow no spaceship ever like sees or anything. You could also see narrative exposition a lot in novels specifically. Like if anyone's read 1984, there's an entire brick of knowledge that's given right in the middle of the book, and it drags on for so long. It drags on for so long, but that is narrative exposition. They say, oh, here's all the things that have been happening, and here's how it's impacting our lives today, and this is how the world works now. That is narrative exposition. However, we got a little bit of a warning here. Too much narrative exposition, too much lore given at once, can feel more like a history lesson than an actual part of the story. Again, like 1984. If you're going the narrative exposition route, you want to make sure that you keep it relatively brief and easy to digest. Make sure that the audience knows, okay, here's the way the world works, and here's what's going on in the story. Just enough to pique their interest, but not enough to where they have to, like, I don't know, read an entire separate novel just to keep up with the story that you're trying to convey. In video games, they do that with books or data logs too. Yeah! Oh my god, especially audio logs. Audio logs kind of fall into a different category though, and we're gonna go over that right now actually, in the form of rumor mills. Rumor mills, much like real life, are people in games and stories that are, you know, just doing their human thing. Humans are social creatures, and socializing leads to gossip. So if you ever run across a video game like BioShock, where there are just like a bunch of audio logs of people basically putting down diary entries and stuff like that, Those are rumor mills. That's basically what a rumor mill is. If you go up to a character in a Dark Souls game and they give you information on this other, like, forgotten god or deity or something like that, that's also a sort of rumor mill. Gossip, rumors, general word of mouth, all of that, they are great ways to give information to your audience, especially if it's given through another person, because that makes it feel more personable. That's like, oh, this like information really resonates with people, and it kind of like shapes how they live and things like that, you know? Has anyone seen Hey Arnold before? There's a particular episode of Hey Arnold where Arnold and his friend Gerald, they try to have like the best weekend ever. And there is this particular character who kind of like made a checklist. They made a checklist of the best things to do for a kid on the weekend. And it's like, oh, you start the day off by having some breakfast, and then you go to a baseball game and things like that. The guy who came up with the list is supposed to be like the quintessential lazy weekend sort of haver person, if I'm not mistaken. So Arnold and Gerald try to replicate that and have their own best weekend ever. Doesn't really work out that well, but you know, that's why it's a rumor mill. It's not always a reliable source of factual information, though that can be used to your advantage, because it does teach a lesson in that particular episode about how like there's no real set checklist to have a good weekend, because you know, things happen and develop for different people, and it might not turn out to be the best for you. Maybe your milk goes bad, or maybe you get the nosebleed seats at a baseball game, things like that. Oh, wait a minute. I thought of an even better example. There's an entire song about this. You know Anastasia, the former 20th Century Fox film that is now owned by Disney? Yeah, that Anastasia. Anastasia has an entire song that's Have You Heard There's a Rumor in St. Petersburg? That's an entire premise of that's an entire premise of the movie, is that there's a rumor that the late Princess Anastasia is still alive and things like that. That's a rumor mill. That is like the best example of a rumor mill. Why did I go on about Hey Arnold? Maybe I just really like Hey Arnold. I don't know. Anyway, next up we've got environmental storytelling. Environmental storytelling is a very, very popular way to convey information, especially in video games and art, in any sort of visual media. And that is because it is info given through various set pieces scattered throughout the world. As you can see behind me, we have a couple examples from Hollow Knight. Specifically, the first Hollow Knight. If anyone in the future is watching this and Silksong has been released, I am very jealous. Here in Hollow Knight, we have this giant bug, and we don't really know what that bug is all about, but it looks like a decayed hollow shell of this giant bug. It looks like it has a lot of growth on it, so it's been dead for a long time. We also have the cast-off shell here that was originally belonging to the former king. This used to be a shell, and we can kind of tell that based off of the shape and color of the horns. This is the pale king. Seeing that and kind of piecing that together with other bits of lore that we learned throughout the game, it just kind of like adds a lot more depth. It adds a lot more intrigue to the setting, to the environment, to the lore. It's like, oh, we want to see what is in this cast-off shell. We want to learn more about it. How did the giant worm that this was turn into the small king that we see later? How did he become such a short king? So yes, when it's done well, environmental storytelling gives just enough information for the audience to figure out the hidden details, like a big puzzle. And that is very, very important, especially in video games. You don't just want to spoon feed everything to your audience. You want to make it engaging. You want to make it exciting. You want your players to figure things out. And that doesn't just go for necessarily visual media as well. It can also go for things that are in the imagination, like a tabletop RPG. Because in a tabletop RPG, you're basically just telling the players what everything looks like around them at any given time. So let's say you have your party make a perception check and they see a skeleton on the floor, but then they realize that the skeleton has a certain emblem emblazoned on their armor, and that emblem belongs to this kingdom that's like halfway across the world. Well, how did that skeleton get there then? It's like, ooh, it adds a lot more intrigue, lots more lore for them to figure out. But when it's not done well, it can be very confusing and vague. Like, let's say you see a giant skull that is like off in the distance, and it's like the size of an island or something like that. And you're just like stranded on a beach somewhere, and there's this giant skull, but like nowhere else has there been any mention of any sort of like giants living in this world that you've built. So like, where did this giant skull come from? But then they just like don't give you that much information. Like, that's the only piece of the thing that you get. And it's like, oh, if you're trying to go for like a horror aesthetic and there's a giant skull island, a literal skull island out there, then like, cool, it fits the motif, but it doesn't necessarily like, I don't know, add that much to the story. Like, people want to find out about the skull, but if they say, oh, it's just a skull, then it's like, why'd you even put it in there in the first place? I want this to be an actual thing. Here's a better point to make about it. Not only is it confusing and vague, but it can also make it like a thing that people want to focus on, but if there's no direction to go from there, it just ends up being a dead end. And you don't want dead ends in your lore, because dead ends just, there's no payoff. There's no good end result for that. We are now going into actionable lore. I use the example Undertale here as a piece of actionable lore. We have this conversation with a frogget, and the frogget says if you act a certain way or fight until you almost defeat a monster, they might not want to battle you anymore. And that is a piece of actionable lore. It's lore that you can use to your advantage, because knowledge is power. In this specific instance, we have this information that if we fight a monster until they're low on health, or if we act a certain way, a friendly way towards them, they will be more reluctant to fight us, and then we can spare them instead of killing them outright. And that is actionable lore. It's good for video games, it's good for tabletop games, basically places where you can use information and kind of like change the outcome of an upcoming encounter or something like that. But because it's so limited in application, it's not exactly like the most dependable way to kind of like give lore. Because another piece of information that we learn later on through a different frogget is that some monsters, specifically boss monsters, their name does not change yellow when you want to spare them. Or like, it said something along the lines of like, some monsters don't need their name to be yellow in order to spare them. And that's specifically boss monsters. So, like I said before, actionable lore has very limited applications. Typically, it's just like, oh, these bandits really like cheese or something like that. And then you could kind of like lure them out of their hidey holes with cheese, because they're mice bandits, I guess, and kind of like go from there. But then you can't really use that information later on, because then there are no mice bandits left. You got rid of them all with the first set. Unless it turns out that the big bad is a former mouse bandit who like turned into an evil wizard or something, and then you realize that through a different piece of lore, and then you like speak to his baser instincts and throw a piece of cheese at him, and he's like, oh, he gets distracted by the cheese, and then bam, now he's defenseless and you could go in for the kill. Yeah, there you go. There's another way of actionable lore being put in action. But yeah, next up, origin stories. Oh, did I do this out of order? I might have done this out of order, but origin stories are not exactly like a way to apply lore. It's more so just like an example of lore. So origin stories are things that tell us the history of the world in a way that simple narration does not. So instead of just saying like, it's the year 2057, humanity has cured cancer, things like that. Origin stories are more so like, in the beginning, there was this mystical light that showered upon the land and rose the earth from the sea, stuff like that. It gives an explanation to how the world came to be, and it makes it seem a lot more grandiose. It makes it feel more important to know these things. It's essential to know these origin stories to find out how people think, how they feel, maybe how certain religions or something popped up. It gives a foundation to a character or a setting in a much more concrete way than just narration. Because narration, you can kind of like contradict in a way, or, well, I don't know. Because I guess the same can be applied to origin stories in a way. Basically, you can have like a piece of lore that everyone knows, but then secretly that's a lie, and there's like an actual factual lore later on down the line that you realize. And it's like somebody else has been lying to you this entire time, and that's the contradiction. And speaking of contradictions, if said contradictions do arise, make sure that it actually makes sense. That's what I mean by fix them. Like I said, if you have the origin story of there's this light that rose the land from the sea, but then it turns out that somebody's been lying about that, like the person in charge of whatever religious faction, it turns out that that's a story that they've been telling to people in order to get them to believe in that, and that in reality, things around them are just a simulation, and the light that is being cast down to rise the land from the sea, that's just a projector. That is just a projector, and we're living in a simulation. Like, that would be an example of conflicting lore in origin stories and things like that. You just need to make sure that you establish an actual ground on which to stand for your setting, for your novel, for your characters, and keep that consistency. Consistency is very, very big, not only just for lore, but for stories in general. Consistency is key. So, now that we've covered lore in other aspects, we're going to go over specifically Vtuber lore, because that is a very big part for a lot of people about their VTubers. As you see right behind me, I have the example of Hololive Council. So for VTubers specifically, lore is kind of a way of establishing your brand or gimmick. With this group specifically, Council, like they're all different deities in a way. You have Fauna, who is the keeper of nature. You have Sana, who's the speaker of space. Bales, Hakos, who is the embodiment of chaos. The warden of time, or Okroni. And you have the guardian of civilization, Nanashi Mume. So they all represent different facets of the world: time, space, nature, civilization, and chaos. As you can see, these are kind of broad themes, and that is a very, very big thing in VTuber lore. You want to try and keep it a little open-ended, like open-ended enough for your character to develop, because as you're starting out your VTuber journey, you're not going to necessarily have everything set in stone right from the get-go. The thing about VTubing is that you're developing a community at the same time that you're developing yourself. So even if you're like a skilled content creator, the people who follow you are going to have their own idea of like how they interact with you and stuff like that, and it's going to lead to some interesting things down the line. Like take Mume for instance. Mume is the guardian of civilization, and she seems like this, you know, she just seems like a gentle little confused owl a lot of times. However, her community latched onto this idea that she's secretly a freaking psychopath because of the things that she draws. And she leans into that a bit. She leans into that. She became a lot more outgoing through that, I feel. We got like a lot of different costumes, we got emotes from it. It all lends to her developing as a person, her developing as a persona as well. When you're looking at lore from the perspective of a novel, you want to have things set in stone there. But when it comes to VTubing, because VTubers, like I said, develop over time, because their platforms are constantly growing and changing and shifting, then that's why you want to keep it open-ended in that way. So here are some suggestions on how to write your VTuber lore. This is just based off of some things that I've noted. What you want to do with your VTuber lore is first you want to think of the character you want to create. Maybe you've already done that, but oftentimes the character or gimmick itself has some lore attached from the get-go. Let's say that you are a ghost VTuber of some kind. Well, ghosts are dead, so right from there, you have a way to kind of like, oh, how did this VTuber die? What keeps it attached to this world? And things like that. So you can build off of there to grow your VTuber lore. But you can then add personal touches that pertain to your interests or content. This is more so optional. You don't necessarily have to do this, but it kind of endears people to you, I feel. If you let your personality shine forth a little bit. Like for me, for instance, not to toot my own horn, there aren't a lot of followers on my account, admittedly. But for me, I really like soul patches and writing, and it seems like other people do as well, maybe? I don't know. Maybe not the soul patch so much. A lot of people don't exactly say that this is a soul patch. They call it a ketchup smear or a strawberry, or like anything else that's not a soul patch whatsoever. But I have gotten a lot of compliments on my writing advice streams, so I do appreciate that. Also, you want to keep a cohesive theme. That is a really, really big thing. Mixing too many things, too many elements together, it makes for messy lore. Like, oh, I'm a space cat girl who is also a god, who is also a ninja in training, things like that. It's like, where are you going with this? It's like, it sounds like you're just trying to be every middle schooler's anime fantasy all at once. Keeping it simple, like, I guess going earlier, Nanashi Mume, she's an owl, but she's also the guardian of civilization. So you've got an animal and you have a concept of civilization to like both build off of. And it's just really those two things as to her like VTuber elements, the things that make up her as a character. Like adding too much is like trying to spread yourself too thin, and there's just like no cohesive center to build off of. Anyway, here are ways to present your lore as a VTuber. Let me get out of the way. So most often, video format is the standard. A lot of people make short videos to explain who they are as a VTuber and things like that. Written descriptions are also fine. There is absolutely nothing saying that you have to limit yourself in that regard, but so long as it's short and sweet. Typically, short and sweet is the goal here, because people have short attention spans. It's not exactly it, but it's usually best in the case of like a short introduction of like, here is my character and here's what they're about. So that's why short and sweet is the goal. It's typically accompanied by an introduction of some kind as well, so not everything has to be crammed into the video itself, because people are also going to learn more about you as they engage with your content. The examples that I have here are a couple different debut videos. We've got Sana's debut video, which I think was really well done. We've got Crimson Bruise as well. He also did a really good job with his debut video, I feel. So you can look over those as examples of what makes a good lore video. You also have Nanner's origin story, from when she was in Vtuber. This is more long form. I think it's like 15, 17 minutes, something like that. And it's done in sort of like a comic book format, a manga setting. And it kind of goes over some different like hidden aspects of her character, specifically when it came to, I think, debuting a new outfit for her. I can't exactly remember, but it accompanied that. And it's just nothing but cram-packed with lore in there. Like I said, if you're going for debut, short and sweet is the goal. If you're a bit more established and want to like develop a certain aspect of your character, that's probably where you can go more long form like Nanners did. Or you can just like not do that. You can also do your own thing. I mean, I certainly didn't do a lore video at all. The example that I did, here's my backstory. Like, this is not written or like video format at all. Mine was a PowerPoint slide. Mine was just like, here's a bird, I got captured by a scientist died, and I learned how to read and write. Like, now I'm here. But it's simple, it's short, it's sweet, it's to the point, and I really like snacks. So like, there's not a lot to me in that regard. I'm a hummingbird who likes snacks, who also enjoys the written word and language. Here's some other stuff to watch out for. Info dumping. Like I said before, adding too much at one time can overwhelm the audience. So you want to feed it in pieces here and there, kind of sprinkle it out like a little crumb sheet on top of a cake or something. I don't know where I'm going with this analogy, but just feed it in pieces so as not to bog them down. You also don't want it to be too vague, because, you know, humans are humans, they love a good mystery, they're curious creatures, but having a piece of lore be too open-ended just makes it confusing, and it causes more harm than good. And last, but certainly not least, you don't want your lore to be unimportant. If a piece of background knowledge doesn't feel important when you're writing it, it probably isn't. Even if it seems cool and quirky and things like that, if it's not actually effective for establishing the bigger picture, just drop it or replace it with something else that is better. Like the Skull Island that I was talking about before. It's not actually pertinent to any like bigger thing in the world, but you know what would be a good giant skull to leave lying around? Subnautica. Subnautica has a giant skeleton at the very deep depths of the ocean, and you're like, how the frick did this giant skeleton get all the way in this chasm? And you scan it and you learn that this thing was a lot older, like millions of years old, and the cave system kind of like grew around it as the environment shifted and things like that. So you learn that there were even bigger creatures than the leviathans that you're facing, and they're massive, they're huge, they're monstrous. You would not want to cross paths with one of them, but they're not alive anymore. You hope. So, what is the biggest lesson that we have learned from the lore? Lore comes in many different forms, all of which help to give vital background knowledge that enriches the story or characters. Whether in books, games, or VTuber backstories, lore gives something shape and helps the audience stay engaged. But you want to make sure that you pace it out, keep it open-ended enough, and make sure it elevates your story. So yeah, I think that is it. Here are the sources, and we can kind of wrap things up and call it a night. Thank you for joining me as always. I always appreciate doing these writing advice streams. I hope that you guys have fun with it too.